Claire Dawson had always been a creature of routine. Every trip she took began the same way. She left her apartment precisely 2 hours before boarding, double-checked her passport even when traveling domestically, and carried her signature leather tote stuffed with neatly folded documents, a travel-size pack of sanitizing wipes, and a tablet preloaded with work files. That morning was no different, or so she thought. Chicago O'Hare was already buzzing at 7:30 a.m., the terminal alive, with 1,000 stories colliding at once. Families shuffled through with strollers. College kids balanced headphones and oversized duffels, while weary business travelers, like Claire, adjusted their suits and clutched paper cups of bitter airport coffee. Announcements echoed from the yacht. Ceiling speakers delays to New York. Gate changes for Los Angeles. It was chaos, but to Claire, it was familiar chaos, almost comforting. She had one thing on her mind: Denver. Her company's quarterly meeting awaited, and she was scheduled to deliver the marketing pitch that might secure her promotion to regional director. Her thoughts circled numbers, slide transitions, and whether she should have chosen the Navy blazer instead of gray. She barely noticed the snaking security line ahead until a TSA officer barked for passengers to remove laptops. Balancing her tote and roller bag, Claire exhaled slowly, trying to block out the tension simmering in her chest. Airports always felt like arenas of hidden pressure, people desperate to get somewhere, people desperate to leave something behind. As she slipped her shoes off and placed her laptop in the gray bin, she caught herself people watching, a habit she had developed years ago when she worked late-night shifts as an EMT. An older couple whispered in hushed tones, clutching hands tightly as if one was afraid of letting the other vanish in the crowd. A young man with earbuds bopped his head to unheard music, oblivious to the scowls of the woman behind him. A mother wrestled with her toddler, who insisted on dragging a stuffed dinosaur through the conveyor belt. These glimpses fascinated Claire. Airports were like temporary stages where everyone played their part before scattering again. The line crawled forward, inch by inch. Claire checked the time on her watch. Still an hour and 20 minutes until boarding. Plenty of time. She opened her phone to glance at her emails, ignoring the overhead chatter. But then something caught her eye. A man a few places ahead seemed different. Not unusual in appearance, just another traveler in civilian clothes. Something about the way he carried himself unsettled her. His stride was uneven, heavy. His shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. And then she noticed his hand pressed tightly against his side, almost hidden beneath his jacket. She frowned. Was he injured? She dismissed the thought quickly. People often look disoriented in airports. Jet lag, nerves, hangovers. But when the man paused near the scanner, his grip on the bag strap slackened, and his knees seemed to buckle slightly. Claire's EMT instincts flared. She hadn't worked in emergency care in years, but once you'd lived through late nights of car crashes and frantic CPR, you never really stopped scanning people for signs of trouble. The line moved again, and Claire rolled her suitcase forward. The man was closer now, just 3 travelers ahead. His backpack slipped from his shoulder, clattering onto the conveyor belt. He didn't flinch. His breathing looked labored, shallow. The woman behind him muttered something about holding up the line, but Claire barely heard. Her focus was pinned to him. Don't get involved, she warned herself. It wasn't her job anymore. She was a marketing executive, not a paramedic. Still, her pulse quickened. She slid her phone into the tray, stepped out of her flats, and nudged her carry-on toward the belt. That was when the shift happened, so sudden, so jarring. It carved through the hum of airport noise. The man stumbled. His body swayed like a tree, caught at a violent gust of wind. He reached for the metal frame of the scanner, but missed, his fingers grasping only air. Gasps rippled through the line. His mouth opened as though to speak, but Only a strangled sound emerged. Then, with terrifying finality, his body lurched forward. Time seemed to fracture. Claire saw his hand peel away from his side, crimson seeping through his shirt, staining the pale fabric in blotches. It grew too quickly. She saw the wide eyes of the TSA officer, frozen in disbelief. She saw a mother clutch her child, pulling them back as if the man were a danger rather than a victim. And then he fell. The impact echoed against the polished floor. A heavy, sickening thud. Silence followed for a single beat so sharp it felt unnatural before chaos erupted. "Call 911?" Someone shouted. "Get back. Give him space." Another voice barked. Passengers stumbled backward, some clutching their belongings, others abandoning them entirely. The orderly shuffle of airport life dissolved into frantic motion. Claire's tote slipped from her shoulder, spilling papers across the floor, but she didn't notice. Her body was already moving forward, instincts overriding hesitation. Kneeling beside the fallen man, she pressed her palms to his chest, searching for consciousness. His eyelids fluttered weakly, and for a fleeting moment, his gaze locked onto hers. His lips parted, forming words she couldn't hear. She bent closer, straining. His breath was ragged, faint. The smell of iron clung to him. "Don't," he rasped, voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't let it through." Claire froze. What did he mean? Before she could ask, his body went limp, head rolling sideways. Blood continued to seep from beneath his jacket, staining the glossy floor in spreading pools. Panic surged around them, TSA officers calling for paramedics, passengers whispering frantically, cell phones raised to capture video. But for Claire, the world had narrowed to this one man, his cryptic warning reverberating inside her head. And then she saw it. Peeking from beneath his jacket, near his collarbone, was an insignia she recognized instantly. A golden trident, the emblem of the U.S. Navy SEALs. The ordinary morning was over. The silence after the man hit the floor was almost worse than the fall itself. For one surreal moment, the bustling noise of O'Hare Airport seemed to cut out, as though someone had hit mute on the entire terminal. Claire could hear her own pulse hammering in her ears, the rasp of her breath, the faint hiss of the overhead ventilation system. Then the screams began. A woman shrieked and pulled her child behind her. A man cursed loudly, stumbling back and nearly tripping over the conveyor belt. Bags toppled from the X-ray machine, laptops clattering onto the rubber mat. Somewhere, a phone slipped from a hand and cracked against the tiled floor. The entire security line had become a churn of chaos. TSA officers rushed forward, their voices overlapping. "Step back. Everyone step back. Call medical. Now. Don't touch him." But Claire was already kneeling beside the man, her training overriding the flood of panic. Her knees hit the cold tile as she reached for him, one hand pressing firmly against the crimson bloom spreading across his shirt. The warmth of the blood soaked her palm instantly, sticky and unnerving, but she forced herself to focus. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked sharply, leaning down. The man's eyelids fluttered, his lips parting slightly. He looked impossibly pale, his skin almost waxen under the fluorescent lights. The strength in his body was ebbing fast. Claire leaned closer, straining to hear over the chaos. "Don't." His voice was barely a whisper, harsh and broken. "Don't let it through." Her brow furrowed. What was it? A person? A package? She wanted to ask, but his body convulsed in a weak shudder, and his head lolled sideways. "Stay with me," she said firmly, pressing down harder on the wound. The blood was seeping too fast, dark rivers sliding beneath her fingers. "Don't. Close your eyes. You're going to be okay." Someone shoved a hand against her shoulder. A TSA officer, young and flustered, tried to pull her back. "Ma'am, you need to step away. I'm trained." Claire snapped, her eyes never leaving. The man. "I was an EMT. He'll bleed out if you don't apply pressure." The officer hesitated, torn between protocol and the urgency in her voice. Finally, he stepped back. Claire pressed her weight onto the wound, gritting her teeth. She had done this before, countless times in the back of ambulances and on dark roadsides, but never in an airport, never in the middle of hundreds of horrified onlookers. Around them, the scene unraveled. Some passengers filmed the ordeal on their phones, narrating in panicked voices. Others argued with officers, demanding they return through the checkpoint. The conveyor belts had been shut down, bags left in mid-scan. Security radios crackled furiously, voices barking codes and commands. The hum of normal airport life was gone, replaced by a cacophony of fear. Claire kept her focus narrowed. "What's your name?" she asked the man, hoping to anchor him to consciousness. But his breathing was shallow, ragged, every exhale a faint rattle. Then she saw it peeking just beneath the edge of his shirt, over his collarbone. A tattoo, not just any tattoo, a golden trident with an anchor and flintlock pistol. Recognition struck her like a jolt of electricity. A Navy SEAL. Her throat tightened. This wasn't a random traveler. This man had seen combat, carried out missions in the shadows. And now he was bleeding out in front of her, in a place that should have been one of the most secure in the country. Two paramedics burst onto the scene, wheeling a stretcher. There. Equipment clattered as they dropped bags onto the floor, kneeling quickly to assess. "We'll take it from here," one said briskly, sliding an oxygen mask over the man's face. Claire reluctantly eased back, her hands shaking, her palms slick with blood. She wiped them on her skirt without thinking, her mind racing. Don't let it through. What had he meant? What could possibly be moving through security that a Navy SEAL would sacrifice himself to stop? As the paramedics worked, Claire noticed something others missed. A small pouch, no larger than a wallet, had slipped from the man's jacket when he fell. It rested half-hidden beneath the conveyor belt, stained faintly with blood. No one else seemed to see it, not the TSA officers shouting commands, not the passengers craning their necks. Her eyes lingered on it. Something about the pouch pulled at her, as though it contained the answer to the man's cryptic warning. Clear a path. One paramedic barked as they hoisted the SEAL onto the stretcher. The crowd parted, though, not without protest. Some passengers demanded to be allowed through. Others cursed about missed flights. None of them understood what Claire had just seen, what she had just heard. The stretcher wheeled away, swallowed by the frantic crowd and the flashing lights beyond the checkpoint. Claire stood frozen, her heart hammering. The SEAL's blood still clung to her skin, tacky and warm. The memory of his voice haunted her ears. Don't let it through. Her gaze drifted again to the pouch under the conveyor. For a long moment she hesitated, torn between leaving it for security and following her gut. Then, with one fluid motion, she knelt, pretending to gather the papers that had spilled from her tote. Her hand closed around the pouch, slipping it into her bag in a single practiced move. She straightened quickly, her expression neutral. No one noticed, but someone had. From across the terminal, near the row of vending machines, a man in a black jacket was watching. His posture was too rigid, his stare too fixed. When Claire's eyes brushed his, he didn't look away. Instead, he adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and began moving slowly, deliberately, toward her. Claire's stomach sank. The ordinary panic of a medical emergency had just shifted into something darker, something calculated. The SEAL hadn't been random, and neither was this. And though she didn't know it yet, she had just stepped into the center of a storm, that would change her life forever. Claire had witnessed death before, too many times. In college, she had pulled late-night shifts on an ambulance crew, watching strangers slip away under flashing red lights. She'd been the one to press chest compressions until her arms screamed, the one to ride in silence after calling time of death. But that was a decade ago. She had chosen a different path, traded adrenaline and trauma for corporate meetings and quarterly reports. She thought she had left that world behind. Yet here she was again, kneeling on a tiled airport floor, blood soaking her hands, staring into the fading eyes of a man who shouldn't have been here. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching monitors, inserting in four, murmuring medical jargon to each other. Their efficiency was clinical, detached. Claire envied them for it. Her pulse was racing too fast, her mind torn between the present chaos, and the words still echoing in her ears. Don't let it through. She replayed the moment in slow motion, his trembling lips, his breath hot and metallic with the scent of blood, the way his fingers had clamped onto her wrist with surprising strength. That hadn't been delirium. That had been intent. He'd wanted her to hear. Her eyes lingered on him. His features were sharp, weathered by sun and hardship, hair close-cropped in military style. He looked like a man forged by discipline and battles most civilians could never imagine. His skin was etched with faint scars along his jawline, near his temple, a long pale line across his forearm. But it was the tattoo that confirmed it. When his shirt had shifted, she'd seen it. The golden trident of the Navy SEALs, the unmistakable emblem of one of America's most elite warriors. A chill washed over her. What was a SEAL doing here, bleeding out in the middle of airport security? He wasn't on vacation, that much she knew. Men like him didn't collapse carrying trivial secrets. Stay with me, she whispered, leaning closer as one paramedic worked to stabilize him. Her voice was low, urgent, almost pleading. What don't you want through? What is it? His eyelids fluttered. For a brief second, clarity returned. His gaze met hers, sharp, deliberate, piercing through the fog of shock. His lips moved again, struggling. Locker 317, he rasped, each word dragged from deep within. His hand twitched, reaching toward her. She caught it, instinctively, gripping tightly. The paramedic glanced at her, annoyance flashing across his face. Ma'am, you need to step back. We need space. But Claire didn't move. She bent even closer, desperate to catch his last words. They followed. He breathed. His grip tightened for one final second, his knuckles white against her skin, before his hand fell limp. His eyes rolled back, and the monitor emitted a sharp, urgent beep. The paramedics sprang into action, one initiating chest compressions, while the other prepared a syringe. Claire stumbled backward, her stomach lurching. The air felt heavy, pressing down on her chest. She had heard enough to know this was bigger than a random medical emergency. Locker 317 followed. Don't let it through. Her gaze darted around the checkpoint, scanning faces. Passengers craned their necks for a better look, murmuring theories to one another. Some speculated about terrorism, others about drugs, some just wanted their flights to resume. But Claire noticed something different. Not everyone was gawking in curiosity. Near the edge of the crowd, a man in a black jacket stood unnaturally still. His posture was too precise, his gaze too focused, not on the commotion, but on her. When their eyes met, he didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and turned as if to blend into the dispersing crowd. A cold prickle ran down Claire's spine. He knew. She looked back at the SEAL. His body was being lifted onto the stretcher, oxygen mask secured, chest rising and falling under the rhythm of compressions. The paramedics shouted for clearance, wheeling him toward the sliding doors where more Emergency personnel waited. And just like that, he was gone, vanished behind the flurry of uniforms and flashing lights. Claire stood frozen in the middle of the terminal, her tote hanging limply from one arm, blood drying on her hands. Her mind spun with questions that had no answers. What was in locker 317? Who was following him? And why, out of everyone in that crowded line? Had he chosen her? The TSA officers were shouting again, corralling passengers back through the scanners, demanding patience and cooperation. But Claire barely heard them. Her focus was fixed on the pouch she had slipped into her bag moments before. The blood-stained fabric seemed to burn against her side, as if it carried a weight far heavier than its size. She wanted to hand it over. Immediately, shove it into the arms of the nearest officer, and wash her hands of the entire nightmare. She wanted to catch her flight, go to Denver, pretend this morning had been nothing but an unfortunate delay. But the SEAL's voice haunted her. Don't let it through. Her conscience twisted. If she ignored his plea, if she walked away, what would happen? What if the thing he'd been carrying slipped through security because she hadn't acted? What if lives depended on it? The logical part of her brain screamed for her to stop. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't an agent. She was a marketing executive who made PowerPoint decks and calculated revenue projections. This wasn't her fight. And yet, in the pit of her stomach, she knew she was already part of it. A sudden commotion snapped her attention back. Officers were questioning passengers, demanding witness statements. A woman pointed toward the security cameras, insisting she'd seen someone suspicious. Another man loudly complained about missing his connecting flight. The airport had become a boiling pot of fear, suspicion, and irritation. Claire edged toward the side exit, her heartbeat quickening. She didn't want to stay for questions. Not with the pouch in her bag. Not with the man in the black jacket lingering somewhere nearby. She needed answers. And the only way to find them was to see what the SEAL had left behind. Her fingers brushed the zipper of her tote, feeling the outline of the pouch. For now, it was hidden. But how long could she keep it that way? As she slipped into the crowd, blending with the flow of restless travelers, one thing became certain. Her life had shifted on its axis. She had stepped across an invisible line, from ordinary into extraordinary, from routine into danger. And with each step she took away from the checkpoint, she could feel the weight of that choice, pressing heavier against her soul. The man in black followed at a distance, his pace unhurried, his gaze unyielding. Claire didn't see him yet, but she would. The airport transformed in minutes. Where there had been orderly queues and the predictable rhythm of travelers shuffling forward, there was now shouting, barricades, and flashing lights. TSA officers barked orders, trying to control the surge of restless passengers. Armed police poured into the checkpoint, their presence unmistakable. Dark uniforms, rigid stances, hands hovering close to weapons. Step back. Everyone returned to the waiting area. An officer yelled, his voice sharp and commanding. The crowd groaned in protest. People clutched boarding passes like lifelines, shouting about missed connections, important meetings, children waiting at home. But their complaints were drowned out by the high-pitched whine of radios, the overlapping codes and urgent instructions being relayed through earpieces. Claire remained in the middle of it all, her tote heavy against her side. The pouch inside seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the crowd and become invisible, but every movement she made felt magnified, scrutinized. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflective glass wall near the checkpoint, pale, shaken, hands still stained faintly with blood. She didn't look like a bystander anymore. She looked like someone caught in the center of something she didn't understand. Locker 317. The number pressed at her mind, echoing with the same insistence as the ECAL's final words. She couldn't ignore it, not now. But how was she supposed to reach it with the airport locked down, officers swarming like bees in a hive? "Ma'am, are you okay?" Claire flinched. A TSA officer stood beside her, clipboard in hand, his expression firm but not unkind. He was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, with neatly cropped hair and the exhausted look of someone who had been yelled at too many times in a single day. I'm fine," Claire managed, forcing her voice steady. "We need a quick statement," he said. "You were closest to him when he collapsed, right?" Her stomach twisted. If she told him everything, the whispered warning, the locker number, the pouch, she would be free of it. It would become his problem, not hers. She opened her mouth, ready to spill it all, but then she saw him again. The man in the black jacket. He was standing across the terminal, near the vending machines, speaking into a cell phone. His eyes flicked toward her once, twice, never lingering long enough to be obvious, but enough to confirm what she already knew. He was watching her. If she handed the pouch to TSA now, if she revealed the locker number, who was to say the information wouldn't end up in the wrong hands? What if the man in black was part of whatever the SEAL had been running from? Her throat went dry. "I didn't hear much," she said finally, lowering her gaze. "He just collapsed. I tried to help until paramedics came." The officer nodded, jotting notes on his clipboard. "Did he say anything?" Claire hesitated, the lie burning in her mouth. "No, just moaning. He wasn't really conscious." The officer scribbled again, then gave her a polite but distracted smile. "Thanks. Stay in the area until we clear passengers for boarding. We'll probably need to speak with you again." "Of course," she murmured. He walked off, and Claire exhaled slowly, guilt gnawing at her. She had lied to federal officers. She had withheld evidence. She was officially crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing. The crowd pressed closer around her as passengers were corralled into a holding area near the gates. Children cried. Business travelers argued into phones. Tourists speculated in nervous whispers. The ordinary atmosphere of the airport had curdled into suspicion and fear. Everyone watched everyone else, eyes narrowed, as though danger could wear any face. Claire hugged her tote tightly, the pouch digging into her ribs. She needed space, air, a chance to think. Her gaze swept the terminal. Officers blocked exits, but the side corridors, the maintenance halls used by staff, remained lightly guarded. If she slipped away, maybe she could find the locker without drawing attention. But that meant breaking rules again, moving deeper into something she didn't understand. She swallowed hard, indecision choking her. Then she saw movement. The man in the black jacket had left his post by the vending machines. He was moving now, slowly but deliberately, through the edge of the crowd. His eyes weren't on the officers, or the gates, or the panicked passengers. They were on her. Her pulse spiked. He wasn't pretending anymore. Claire turned away quickly, pretending to check her phone, pretending to be another frustrated traveler. But her legs betrayed her, shifting toward the corridor, toward escape. The crowd jostled around her, covering her movement for a few precious steps. She slipped into the side hall, heart hammering. The fluorescent lights here buzzed faintly, the echo of her footsteps loud in the emptiness. Behind her, voices from the terminal faded, replaced by the sterile quiet of staff-only spaces. She tightened her grip on her tote. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to return to the safety of the crowd and the protection of law enforcement. But another voice, a quieter, steadier one, reminded her of the SEAL's eyes. His final plea, the urgency in his broken voice. Don't let it through. Her feet carried her deeper down the hall. Each step felt like a commitment, a vow she hadn't spoken aloud. Behind her, faint but certain, came the echo of another set of footsteps. The man in black had followed. The restroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air, the kind of sterile, impersonal scent that clung to every corner of O'Hare. Claire slipped inside, her tote hugged tightly against her chest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unflattering, throwing sharp reflections across the row of sinks. The stalls were mostly empty, save for one occupied at the far end. A pair of sneakers peeked out beneath the door, the occupant oblivious to the storm unraveling just outside. Good. Claire didn't want witnesses. She pushed into the middle stall, latched the door, and sank onto the closed toilet lid. Her hands trembled as she set the tote on her lap. For a long moment she just stared at it, the weight of her choice pressing down on her chest like a vice. She shouldn't open it. She should hand it over to TSA or the nearest police officer, wash her hands of this madness, and walk away. But the SEAL's voice haunted her. Don't let it through. Locker 317. They followed me. Her conscience gnawed at her. If she ignored his plea, who would listen? Would anyone even believe him or her? Or would this pouch, this cryptic trail he'd left behind, simply vanish into bureaucracy, swallowed whole by the airport's labyrinth of security reports? Her fingers fumbled with the zipper. She hesitated once more, her breath catching in her throat. Then, with a sharp inhale, she pulled it open. The pouch wasn't much, just a blood-stained fabric bag, the kind a soldier might carry for essentials. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, lay a flash drive. Its casing was nondescript, black and unmarked, except for faint scratches that looked almost deliberate, as though someone had tried to obscure identifying details. Alongside, it was a folded piece of paper, edges worn soft, smudged faintly with blood. Claire unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing it against her knee. 2 sets of numbers were scrawled in hurried handwriting. 317 8492. Her breath quickened. Locker 317. The numbers matched. The second string 8492 had to be the combination. She sat frozen, staring at the paper and the flash drive in her hands. Whatever was on this drive, it was important enough for a Navy SEAL to risk his life carrying it. Important enough for him to bleed out in an airport security line just to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. A toilet flushed down the row. Claire shoved the items back into the pouch, her pulse racing. She zipped it closed and returned it to her tote just as the restroom door creaked open. Through the crack in her stall, she saw him, the man in the black jacket. He stepped inside slowly, his head tilting, his eyes scanning the row of mirrors as though checking his reflection. But Claire knew better. He wasn't here to fix his hair. He was hunting. Her breath caught, shallow and silent. She pressed her back against the stall wall, willing herself invisible. The man walked the row of stalls, his footsteps measured, deliberate. He paused near hers, and for one terrifying moment, she thought he would reach for the latch. Instead, he crouched slightly, peering at the shoes beneath the stall. Claire cursed herself silently for not lifting her feet. She gripped the tote tightly, her knuckles white, heart thundering so loudly she feared he'd hear it. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, mercifully, the restroom door swung open again. Another traveler entered, muttering under his breath about delays. The man in black straightened, gave a polite smile, and stepped aside, washing his hands as if he were any ordinary passenger. He left without a backward glance, but Claire knew. He had seen her shoes. He knew she was there, and he was waiting. She counted to 30 before she dared to move. She flushed the toilet, lifted her tote, and slipped out of the stall, forcing her breathing to steady. Her reflection in the mirror looked nothing like herself, pale, wild-eyed, blood still faintly smeared across her wrist. She looked like someone caught in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She splashed cold water on her face, wiped her hands dry, and left the restroom, bracing herself for what came next. The terminal was no calmer. Security officers still controlled the flow of passengers, corralling them into waiting areas. The PA system repeated announcements about delays, each one greeted with groans and curses. The chaos provided cover, but it also meant Claire stood out less. She kept her tote close, her eyes darting across the crowd. The man in black was nowhere in sight, but she knew he was near. Men like that didn't simply give up. Her thoughts churned. The pouch, the drive, the locker, every instinct screamed that she was carrying something dangerous, something people were willing to kill for. But what was she supposed to do with it? Go to TSA? No. If the man in black was part of this, the wrong pair of ears could bury the evidence before it saw daylight. Go to the police? Maybe, but how could she be sure they'd believe her, or even have the clearance to understand what she was holding? That left one option, the locker. If she opened it, if she saw what the seal had hidden, maybe she'd understand what she was up against. Maybe then she could make a decision, whether to turn it over, run, or something else. Her mind wandered, briefly to Denver, to the conference she was supposed to be preparing for. The thought felt absurd now, as if it belonged to another life. A life that had ended the moment the SEAL fell at her feet. She drew a deep breath and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. Near the corner of the concourse, she caught sight of him again. The man in black. He was across the terminal, standing by a newsstand, flipping through a magazine he clearly wasn't reading. His eyes lifted once, casually, locking onto her for half a second before dropping back to the page. Her stomach lurched. He wasn't rushing her. He was shadowing her, hurting her, maybe, waiting for her to slip. Claire forced herself to keep walking, her pace steady, her expression neutral. She couldn't run. Not here. Not yet. Running would draw attention. Running would confirm she had something worth chasing. But every instinct in her body screamed one truth. She was prey. And the hunt had only just begun. Claire moved with the flow of the crowd, her tote pressed close to her body, as if it contained nothing more than travel essentials. On the surface, she looked like every other stranded passenger shuffling between gates, but inside her chest, war raged, panic, dread, and the stubborn flicker of resolve. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The man in the black jacket was still there. Not close, not obvious, but present. Always present. He lingered near the Hudson News stand, pretending to study a rack of headphones. A moment later he strolled, casually past a group of tired travelers, his pace matching the crowd, his eyes never fixed on her long enough to draw suspicion. Claire's throat tightened. Whoever he was trained. This wasn't random curiosity or coincidence. He was tracking her with the precision of a predator. She turned into a busier concourse, where fast food restaurants spilled their greasy scents into the air, and travelers queued for overpriced sandwiches. The noise here was a blessing, loud, chaotic, full of distractions. She slipped into the line at a sandwich shop, trying to disappear among the cluster of customers. Her hands shook as she ordered a bottle of water she didn't want. She held it like a prop, forcing herself to take slow sips as though nothing were wrong. When she glanced at the reflection in the glass counter, she saw him again. Standing at a distance now, pretending to check his phone, but always angled toward her, her pulse hammered. If she stayed in the crowd, he'd never lose her. If she ran, she'd expose herself. What she needed was a diversion. Her eyes scanned the terminal. Then she saw it a family struggling with 3 oversized suitcases, children bickering loudly. The parents were overwhelmed, trying to wrangle tickets, luggage, and a crying toddler all at once. Claire seized the moment. She set her unopened water bottle on the table and maneuvered quickly around the family, slipping into their chaos. 4. A few precious seconds. She was shielded by their noise and movement. She ducked low, adjusting her tote strap, and cut sharply into a service corridor marked authorized personnel only. Her breath came fast and shallow. She was breaking rules again, deeper this time. But she had no choice. The man in black was too close. The corridor was narrow, sterile, lined with gray walls and humming utility pipes. The sound of the terminal dulled behind her, replaced by the faint echo of her own footsteps. She forced herself to slow, to breathe, to listen. Then she heard it. Footsteps behind her, measured, steady, closing in. She froze, her back pressing to the wall. Her fingers clenched the tote so tightly, her nails dug into the fabric. The man in black had followed her. Of course he had. Claire's mind raced. She needed a way out. Ahead, the corridor split one path leading toward a staircase, the other bending deeper into the bowels of the airport. She darted left, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but adrenaline carried her higher, toward a maintenance level above. The terminal. At the top, she shoved open a heavy metal door and stumbled into a dimly lit hall, lined with cleaning supplies and storage closets. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and machine oil. She paused, chest heaving, listening. The footsteps followed. Steady, relentless. He was close, too close. Claire ducked into the nearest closet, pulling the door shut behind her. Darkness enveloped her, broken only by a sliver of light beneath the door. She pressed herself against the shelves, her body trembling, every muscle taut with fear. Through the crack, she saw him. His shadow stretched across the floor as he passed slowly, silently. He paused outside her hiding place, the light dimming as his form blocked it. Claire's heart pounded so hard, she feared it would give her away. She clamped a hand over her mouth, barely daring to breathe. Seconds dragged into eternity. Then footsteps again, fading, moving past. She waited, counting to 60, then another 60, before she finally eased the door open. The hall was empty, but she knew it wasn't over. The chase wasn't a sprint. It was a game of patience. And he had more of it than she did. Claire slipped back toward the stairwell, forcing herself to stay quiet. If she could circle around, maybe she could lose him in the terminal crowds again. Maybe she could reach locker 317 before he cornered her. But as she descended the stairs, another realization struck her like ice water. What if he wasn't alone? The thought chilled her to the bone. The man in black was skilled, yes, but he wasn't superhuman. If the SEAL's warning had been true, if they were following him, then there was more than one hunter in this airport. And Claire was carrying exactly what they wanted. She emerged back into the main concourse, blinking against the harsh lights. A crowd swallowed her, a sea of restless travelers. For a moment, relief flickered. She was hidden again, until she saw him. Not the man in black, another one. Different jacket, different haircut, but the same watchful eyes. He stood near the gate entrance, scanning the crowd with quiet intent. When his gaze swept past her, it lingered just a beat too long. Her stomach dropped. They weren't just following her. They were closing in. Claire gripped her tote, her decision crystallizing in that instant. She couldn't keep running aimlessly. She had to reach the locker. Whatever was inside, it was. The key to this nightmare. It had to be. She set her jaw, steadied her breathing, and merged deeper into the flow of passengers, angling toward the far side of the terminal. The hunters watched, patient and calculating, but Claire moved with purpose now. The chase had begun. And for the first time, she wasn't just running from something. She was running toward it. Claire's legs burned with fatigue, but she forced herself onward. Each step through the quieter corridors of the airport felt like a gamble, a precarious thread between survival and capture. The pouch in her tote weighed heavily against her. Side, a constant reminder of the choice she had made, the choice to take responsibility for the SEAL's final warning. Her heart hammered with every echoing footstep. She had memorized the number he had whispered in his last moments. Locker 317. She had memorized the combination scrawled on the bloodied note. 8492. Every detail was imprinted in her mind, as though the SEAL had drilled it there personally. The maintenance corridor ended at a small service elevator. Claire pressed the button with trembling fingers, ignoring the faint beep that indicated it had already been called. The doors opened with a sigh of hydraulic pressure, and she stepped inside, her breath loud in the narrow metallic space. The elevator walls were scratched and dull, the fluorescent light flickering above her head. She gripped the tote strap tightly, pressing the pouch closer to her chest, praying it would remain secure. The ride down felt like an eternity. Every ding of the descending floors echoed like gunshots in her ears. When the doors finally slid open, she was met with the dull, sterile hallway of the airport's service lockers, a long corridor lined with gray steel doors, each marked with a chew number. Locker 317. She stopped for a moment, forcing herself to breathe. Her fingers shook as she reached into her tote and withdrew the pouch. She set it on the floor in front of the locker, unzipping it carefully, revealing the flash drive and folded paper. She took a deep breath and entered the combination. 8492. The lock clicked open. The locker door creaked slightly as she pulled it open, revealing a slim folder stacked with documents, photographs, and several USB drives neatly organized inside. Her eyes scanned the contents quickly, but even a cursory glance sent her stomach lurching. Shipping manifests, coded communications, photographs of cargo containers, trucks, and men in suits exchanging packages in shadowed warehouses. Every piece pointed to a network of illegal arms trades, private contractors selling weapons to untraceable buyers overseas. Her mind reeled. The SEAL hadn't been carrying something trivial. He had been carrying evidence, proof of corruption, proof of criminal activity that could shake powerful organizations. And now it was in her hands. A sudden noise made her freeze. The lockers were supposed to be empty at this hour. Footsteps slow, deliberate echoed down the corridor. Claire's pulse spiked. She grabbed the pouch, sliding the folder and drives inside for protection, zipping it shut. She needed to move. Now, from the shadows, a figure emerged. The man in black. His eyes locked onto hers immediately, calculating, unwavering. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, almost conversationally, but there was steel beneath. The calm. Step away from the locker. Claire pressed herself against the locker wall, clutching her tote. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, forcing her voice steady. He took a step closer, deliberate, measured. "You're carrying something dangerous. Something that doesn't belong to you. I'm just trying to keep it safe," Claire said, her voice shaking despite herself. "A Navy SEAL he left it for me. He said don't let it through." The man's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. You can't protect it." Claire swallowed hard. "Then who can? Who's supposed to have it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, and instinctively, Claire stepped back, her hand gripping the tote like a shield. She was no longer a passive bystander. She had the evidence. She had a responsibility, whether she liked it or not. The man in black stopped a few feet away. "You don't know what you're up against," he warned. One wrong move and, before he could finish, Claire made a split-second decision. She shoved past him and bolted down the corridor, heart pounding so violently it felt like it would burst from her chest. He reacted instantly, moving with inhuman speed, but Claire was prepared. She knew the layout better now, knew the twists and turns, the stairwells, the doors. She ducked through a side hall, pressed herself into a shadowed alcove, and slowed her breathing, listening for the sound of pursuit. The man didn't stop. His footsteps echoed after her, steady and relentless. He wasn't panicked. He didn't make noise that gave away his position. He was hunting. Claire knew she couldn't keep running blindly. She needed a plan. She needed leverage. She pulled the tote close, the pouch pressed against her ribs, and thought fast. The evidence. That was her leverage. If she could get it to someone, she could trust someone with authority and discretion. Then she could protect herself and the SEAL's work. But the airport was a maze, and she had no idea who was loyal, who was part of the network, who she could even trust. She rounded another corner and ducked behind a supply cart, her chest heaving. Her mind raced through possibilities. Hiding. The evidence? Destroying it? No, that was unthinkable. A SEAL had risked everything to protect it. She couldn't throw it away. Her only option was to move, keep moving, and find an exit that gave her control over the situation. She peeked around the cart. The corridor was empty. She ran again, moving faster, forcing herself to ignore the burning in her legs and the sharp ache in her lungs. She emerged into a wider service corridor that led toward the main terminal. The noise and chaos of passengers, shouting officers, and beeping carts filled her ears. For a moment, hope flared. She could blend into the crowd, disappear from his view. She could make it to a terminal exit, and from there, safety? Maybe. But then she heard another set of footsteps, heavier this time, coming from behind. Not the man in black, but another pursuer. She hadn't accounted for the others, the ones who might be after the SEAL's evidence, the ones he had warned about. Claire's heart sank. She was trapped in the middle of a hunt she didn't understand, armed only with a tote, a flash drive, and her own courage. And somewhere in the throng, danger was closing in from all sides. Her eyes scanned the corridor, looking for anything, Stairwell, a side door, a utility hatch that might give her a way out. She spotted a narrow door marked Maintenance Exit, Authorized Personnel Only, slightly ajar. It was a long shot, but it was her only chance. She made her move, sprinting toward the door as fast as her exhausted legs could carry her. Behind her, the echo of footsteps multiplied. They were coming, and she couldn't let them catch her. She reached the door, yanking it open, and slipped through into the dimly lit service stairwell beyond. The air was cool, tinged with the metallic scent of machinery. She pressed herself against the wall, taking rapid, shallow breaths, listening intently. The corridor below was empty. For now, Claire knew the danger wasn't gone. It was just waiting, watching, calculating. But for the first time, she had what the SEAL had left behind, the evidence, the key to exposing the truth. And that knowledge, as terrifying as it was, gave her the only thing she needed to keep going: resolve. The chase wasn't over, not by a long shot. But Claire Dawson was no longer running blindly. She was running with purpose. The terminal was a blur of motion and sound. Travelers hustled toward gates, oblivious to the invisible war unfolding around them. Claire pressed her tote against her chest, the pouch with the SEAL's evidence nestled inside. Her legs burned with exhaustion, lungs burning with each shallow breath, but she kept moving, weaving through clusters of people with practiced precision. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning every corner, every shadow, every reflection in polished windows. The man in black was close, She could feel it silent, patient, relentless. Every instinct screamed that he wasn't alone. Somewhere in the terminal, others were watching, waiting for the slightest mistake. Claire rounded a corner near gate C-17, the digital sign flashing flight updates. Her own flight to Denver was listed as delayed, a small mercy. For a brief second, she considered blending into the boarding line, disappearing among the passengers. But she knew better. She could be followed. She could be watched. And the evidence she carried proof of an illegal network that could reach the highest echelons of power was too important to be left in anyone else's hands. Her fingers tightened around the tote strap. I have to see this through, she thought. I have to finish what he started. A man in black appeared from the crowd, as if conjured from thin air. His calm, deliberate pace gave no hint of urgency, yet Claire's stomach knotted. He wasn't rushing her. He was her shadow, a predator waiting for the moment to strike. Claire ducked into a quiet side hallway, hoping to lose him, but the moment she turned, she froze. Two more figures emerged, blocking the exit back to the main terminal. Claire realized with a jolt, this wasn't just one pursuer. This was a coordinated effort. The SEAL's warning had been real. They had been following him, and now they were following her. Her pulse spiked. Think. She glanced at the tote. The flash drive, the documents, it was everything. If she could get it into the hands of someone she trusted, someone with authority and discretion, she could end this nightmare safely. But who could she trust in an airport, crawling with people who might be compromised? Claire's eyes fell on the emergency exit door at the end of the hall. It led outside to a service lane behind the terminal. Dangerous, yes, but potentially her only way to safety. She bolted. The man in black reacted immediately, breaking into a controlled sprint, his footsteps echoing against the corridor walls. The other two gave chase, faster, more frantic. Claire's adrenaline surged, giving her legs strength beyond her fatigue. She darted past janitorial carts, sliding past crates of luggage and stacks of paper boxes, her tote bouncing against her side. She hit the emergency door, yanking it open. A cold gust of early morning air hit her face, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and exhaust. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit followed, muffled by the distance but relentless. Claire sprinted down the narrow service lane, shadows stretching across her path from the terminal lights. She could hear one of the men shouting, another ordering her to stop, but she didn't slow. Every step carried her closer to the truck, parked at the far end of the lane, a small delivery vehicle she spotted earlier, keys still in the ignition. If she could reach it, she could put a barrier between herself and her pursuers. Her heart thundered. She could almost feel the man in black gaining on her. She risked a glance back. He was there, calm and calculated, keeping pace despite the distance. The other two were closer, their movements sharper, more desperate. Claire made it to the truck, yanking the door open and sliding inside. She threw the tote onto the passenger seat, fumbling for the keys. Her hands shook violently, but she managed to turn the ignition. The engine roared to life, startling birds into the sky. She didn't wait. She hit the gas, the tires squealing on the concrete as she barreled down the narrow lane. The man in black stood frozen for a split second, watching her escape, and then he moved, retreating with a calm efficiency that suggested he wasn't done. Claire navigated through the service lane, her eyes scanning for obstacles, for exits, for anyone who might stop her. She knew she couldn't drive forever. Eventually, someone would notice. Someone would intercept her. She needed a plan. And then it hit her. The SEAL had left instructions. Not in words, not in direct commands, but in the logic of the pouch, the flash drive, the locker. Whoever had been hunting him would assume she was just a scared traveler. Someone who didn't understand the weight of what she carried. But she did understand now. She could use that. She drove toward a secluded parking structure she had seen earlier while navigating the terminal. Its shadowed corners and narrow ramps offered concealment. Claire slipped inside, parking the truck in a dimly lit corner. She sat for a moment, chest heaving, and opened her tote again. The flash drive, the documents, they were intact. She took a deep breath. Her mind cleared. She had a decision to make. Option 1. Turn over the evidence to the authorities. Risk exposure, risk betrayal. Who could she trust? The SEAL's warning suggested the network had reach, maybe even inside law enforcement or federal agencies. Option 2. Destroy it, erase it, throw it away. That would end the immediate danger, but she couldn't do it. Not after what she had seen, what he had risked. That wasn't protection. It was surrender. Option 3. Take it somewhere safe herself. Control it. Use it to expose the network. Find allies she could trust. Dangerous, yes, but the only choice that honored the SEAL's sacrifice. Her fingers trembled over the flash drive. She glanced out the parking structure window. The man in black had not followed her here, at least. Not visibly, but she knew he would. They would all converge eventually. She couldn't wait for them. Claire's jaw set. She made her choice. She drove back onto the main road leading away from the terminal, blending with early morning traffic. Her pulse slowed slightly, but she stayed hyper-aware. Every rearview mirror could hide a pursuer. Every passing car could be an agent of the network. As she turned toward the highway, she called the one person she could trust implicitly, a former colleague from her MD days. Someone outside of corporate chains, someone with integrity and discretion. She didn't reveal details over the phone. She simply instructed him to meet her at a safe location, far from the airport, with the understanding that what she carried was urgent, dangerous, and potentially explosive. Minutes passed like hours as she navigated city streets. Every honk, every sudden movement sent her heart racing. She was not just escaping. She was carrying the key to exposing a dangerous operation, the remnants of a mission the SEAL had fought to protect. Finally, she saw the familiar building her colleague's workshop, secure, unremarkable from the outside. Claire parked, her hands still trembling, the tote clutched like a lifeline. She checked the flash drive, the documents, everything was intact. As she stepped inside, she felt the first surge of relief in hours. She wasn't safe yet. She knew the man in black would continue hunting. But for the first time, Claire felt control. She had made her decision, and she was prepared to see it through. She handed the tote to her colleague, explaining in hushed, urgent tones that she needed him to protect the contents until authorities or trusted allies could act. He nodded, understanding the gravity without question. Claire sank into a chair, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her mind replayed the SEAL's warning, the blood, the chase. The danger wasn't gone. The network still existed. But the SEAL's mission, his sacrifice, would not be in vain. She looked out the window, the early morning sun breaking over the city skyline. For the first time since the collapse at the airport, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. She had made the choice, carried the burden, and survived the hunt. Somewhere out there, the man in black was still watching. But Claire Dawson had crossed a line she would never return from. She was no longer an ordinary traveler. She was a guardian of secrets, a witness to a dangerous truth, and the last link between a Navy SEAL's mission and the justice it demanded. And as the city stirred to life around her, Claire knew one thing with certainty. The story wasn't over. But for now, she had won this battle. And that was enough.